Bill, Oram, OregonLive.com. You read him in the Oregonian print as well. On Twitter at Bill Oram. Good evening. Good morning. However you're feeling right now, Bill. I know you're turned around a little bit what time you're supposed to be on, but it's good to have you on. I just want to know, I didn't think you got a lot of pushback in the back and forth, even though it went pretty viral locally. Where does it rank yesterday for you of your pushing and pressing questions in your media career? Like, what are some other memorable moments you've had back and forth wise with either a coach or an athlete?
Good morning. I think probably, I don't know. I mean, I'm so locked in on kind of this moment and this thing right now. But the one that does come to mind is when the Lakers were falling apart in 2018. Was that 2018 when 2019, Magic Johnson
quit?
resigned abruptly.
Yeah.
And then the Lakers didn't have a press conference until they introduced Frank Vogel on May 20th, 2019, the day my son was born. And going to that press conference was the first time Rob Pelinka had spoken. And that morning, Magic Johnson went on First Take and said Rob Pelinka had stabbed him in the back. And so, getting to ask Rob Pelinka a bunch of questions about being a backstabber and asking him if he worked for Kurt Rambis or Kurt Rambis worked for him. That one comes to mind. That one was fun. I've certainly asked coaches before whether or not they think they are the right person for the job or if they think they're going to keep their job. Sometimes the job calls for it. And in this instance with Trent Bray at Oregon State, I felt like it did in this moment as well.
Well, the juice for this game was already not really there. You come in yesterday, and I think you bring up a valid question. What did you just make initially of – you say like, hey, why are you the man for the job? And he basically, because I love it here, because I like to coach. Like, what did you make of his first answer? I know you were in a back and forth rapid fire, but what did you make of the first answer?
I thought it was milquetoast and uninspiring. And, there are people who think that that's an unfair question because what is he going to say? He's not going to say no. And I would argue that it's a softball question. It's not a gotcha question. It's not unfair. I think it's a softball. It is a chance for you to tell everyone why you think it's going better than it seems, why you believe in the direction of your program, why the results don't tell the whole story. And he didn't do that. He basically repeated the same talking points that he used in his introductory press conference, which, as you said, I love this place. I think it's a special place. And as I noted in the column, if your reasons haven't evolved in the 18 months or nearly 2 years since you took the job, that shows me that you haven't grown since you took the job. And the results bear that out. Trent Bray's attitude toward this job bear it out. It hasn't been 2 weeks since he swore on national TV and threw his team under the bus. I don't care, how you want to wrap that up. You call one of your units a joke, you are hanging your team and your coaches out to dry. I mean, I think that was fireable on its face. But the fact that things have only gotten worse, the fact that he didn't have a solution for the long snapping crisis, the fact that the defense is worse, and I do not care what Trent Bray says, he is wrong.
I tend to agree with you.
To say that the defense in the first two games is better than a year ago is just wrong. And last year's defense was bad and had a lot of issues, and there were a ton of injuries. But the tackling, I mean, Brandon, I am not a football savant, and I own that, and I would never argue that I am. But I can watch a football game, and I know what my eyes are telling me. And when guys are getting juked out of their cleats, when they're falling over, when it seems like they have KY jelly on their hands as guys slip through tackles, it tells me that there's something wrong. And this defense just doesn't have it. And when you basically are staking your entire credibility as a coach on the defense, that is your thing. You take over the defensive play calling because you are the only one who can come in and save it from the disaster that was last year, and it gets worse. That tells me there's something wrong. So I think there are issues all over the field there. And I just want to say this other thing too.
Yeah.
When you have the right coach and when you don't have the right coach. And right now, Oregon State does not have the right coach. And when it becomes a question of when, not if, you're going to fire him, and I think pretty universally, even the people who think that it was unfair or premature to call for his firing, which is not something I take lightly, even if you think it was premature, I think pretty universally people agree that it is a question of when, not if, he will be fired. And once you agree that it's when, not if, then the answer to when is right now.
Bill Orm's our guest here, OregonLive.com. Got a great article up there. This is the outcome Oregon State can control. Beavers must fire Trent Bray, to what you just said. You don't like to write these, but every once in a while it's like, what else are you supposed to say? There was a moment in the 3rd and 26 play, the running back for Tech, he caught the screen pass. They came out of a timeout. They looked like they had never talked about how to tackle on that play. There was a number 6 player for the Beavers. If people go watch the replay, he had an easy tackle on that player to go out of bounds and stop him at the 15. He gently pushes him. The running back remains on his rush lane and scores an easy touchdown. I went and rewound it and watched it twice. And I'm like, that's effort. That's care. And there is none of it. I'm with you 100% on the defense. Like, take away the punt return. Fresno State's offense still scored 29 on you. You want to go back to Cal and say, well, it's too easy, quick touchdowns. Well, how did they get set up for touchdowns? How about 12 men on the field? You give the ball back, they score an easy touchdown. Like, there's just no indication. And you can't dismiss what Texas Tech just did to you, dude. That's the game. That's the result. I found that answer weak and a cop-out and inaccurate in every possible way. And I want to like Trent Bray, but I think you're 100% right, because even if the people that think you're prematurely calling for it, okay, so what's your threshold here? Get housed in Eugene? We know that's going to happen this week. Oregon didn't play their cleanest game. All right, and then what next weekend? You play Houston at home? Houston just handled Colorado. They're going to be probably a 10-point favorite in your building. There's going to be 8,000 people at that game. Then what? Then that point, like, if you tell me the difference between firing him now versus in 3 weeks, then you're telling me he should be fired. Like, to your point, that's exactly what that's telling me. Do you have any indication or intel or read that this athletic department is even awake to consider this stuff right now? Where are they at right now?
That's a good question. I've gotten sort of mixed signals. I think the big question is where's Scott Barnes? Where's JFE Murphy? And those are the two that I think are tough to read. I don't think Trent Bray has made a ton of friends as a head coach for the same reason I've talked about. He is not good at the duties of being the CEO of the football program. He wants to coach ball, and that I think he has created a bit of a silo within the football program where I don't know that he has I don't know if Scott Barnes has, developed a real fondness for Trent Bray in this role, or not. I don't mean to say that one way or the other, but I don't get a sense that, Trent Bray has a ton of allies in that athletic department or at that university beyond, the appreciation for what he did in a moment of crisis, because it cannot be overlooked. And it is 100% a part of this conversation that he was loyal to Oregon State in a moment where that school was desperate for somebody to stand up for it and to stand up and fight for Oregon State. And he did do that. And that should be remembered and celebrated and part of his legacy 100%. Doesn't mean he's a good head coach.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the Blazer Cronin thing, like they were going to hire Joe Cronin. They did no interviews. And maybe Joe will prove that his roster management's the right move, right, in basketball. But I'm kind of torn here. I felt this way when they hired him, and I didn't know what he was going to be, right? But I just felt like it was the easy cop-out. I said yesterday.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, I was going to say, it feels like an institution athletically. The men's program is kind of irrelevant, if not completely. I know the baseball team is still good. The women's basketball team is kind of their, they carry the torch till they get to baseball season at this point. Football is just completely fallen off a cliff. And they're a point where an entire restart almost feels worthy, and they need to go hire somebody to see what Tulane did. You need to go look at the programs around the country who don't have a lot of great funding. They're not in a power conference because this woe is me. Everybody left us. We just accept our fate, and it is what it is. I hate that defeatist mentality. And so instead of being proactive and saying, no, we can do okay, we can get out of this, it just kind of felt to me an easy, it's the guy who played here and some players like him. And I don't know if I liked that move in the moment, and it's not worked out so far for him.
Well, and I think that there is a real, especially over the last couple of years, but I also think throughout history, there's a real victim mentality at Oregon State and a real woe is me. Yes. And a lot of, who else could do better because we were left for dead by the Pac-12. And that's true. But you can go back to when Jonathan Smith left, and I wrote a column sort of, throwing out a few names, somebody I thought would have been great at Oregon State was Jason Eck. Now, Jason Eck was at Idaho. Now New Mexico just beat UCLA in the Rose Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jason Eck was not available to Oregon State when they needed to make a hire. Neither was Brent Vegan at Montana State, who's another guy who should be on every mid-major group of 5 programs radar if they have an opening. Because the FCS playoffs were starting and Oregon State needed a coach right freaking now. Because the portal was opening, they were trying to preserve their roster, they were trying to keep that team intact, they were trying to keep the very thing that ended up happening from happening. Mm-hmm. So you hire Trent Bray to preserve what you have, and then everybody leaves anyway. So it didn't work,
mm-hmm.
and you didn't get a coaching search, and you didn't get to go out and do a national search and try to hire the best possible person. Because if you did wait until mid-December, to do that comprehensive search, maybe you are able to hire Jason Eck. Maybe you do hire Brent Vegan. Maybe you hire Trent Bray anyway. But because you felt like the most urgent thing was to, secure the house, which I completely understand. I do not begrudge them for that decision.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a decision made out of necessary haste. And it didn't pay off immediately, and it has not paid off in the what I guess you consider the medium term. Like, we haven't seen the long-term results here, but it has not paid off in the short to medium term. So what are you getting out of this decision other than, well, this is the guy we hired, so we need to write it out? You don't need to write it out. UCLA just showed that you don't need to write it out. Virginia Tech just showed that you don't need to write it out. Like, you can make decisions. And this I think is for me, this is the point that pushed me the most to write this. Oregon State has done this, thing where it's like, oh, all these bad things keep happening to us, and there's nothing we can do about it because we're Oregon State and we're getting flopped around by the TV networks and by Oregon, and we're just getting beaten up. This is something that Oregon State can control. Do you have the right football coach? If the answer is no, you can control that. And that's why I think it's imperative that they make this decision and get the train back on the tracks and show that you're taking matters into your own hands on the one thing you can't control. To me, it's just not even a question.
2 more for you, because we do appreciate you hopping on today. Yesterday was very interesting to watch some pushback in those press conferences. You don't get a lot of that anymore, especially at that university. It's a lot of softball layup ones. So I enjoyed the back and forth. I guess what I would ask you is, and look, if it's a guess, that's a guess. There's no holding your feet to the fire here. Do you think there's an element of is it 0-5? Is it losing to App State on the road? Is it getting bludgeoned at Eugene? Your best possible guess? Or do you think they honestly might ride this out for the whole year and just say, 3-9, 4-8, and then we'll move on at that point?
In my opinion, okay, so there's what I think should happen, and then there's what I think is probably more likely to happen.
Right.
And I, for example, we didn't think that Oregon State could beat Washington State at home last year when they were in the middle of that brutal losing streak. And then, lo and behold, Ben Branson has a great game. You get the game-winning field goal by Everett Hayes at the end, and the Beavers beat Washington State at home for some feel good at the end of the year. They still lost, 5 of 6 to end the season, 6 of 7, 5 of 6. And but that little bit of juice made you feel a little bit better about things at the end of last season. So I say that as a caveat because I do sort of see the Beavers finding a way to bounce back in one of these games that they're going to be underdogs in, either home against Houston or at Appalachian State. I think there's talent. I think Malik Murphy is good. I think there's going to be some pride that kicks in. And what I would hate to see Oregon State get one of those sort of out of nowhere or unexpected victories and then say, see, we've got the right guy after all. And then you finish 2-10. And now you're well, we didn't fire him, so now we've got to give him another recruiting cycle. And you go into next year with a guy that you probably don't feel that good about and don't think is the right guy. So that would be my case for firing him now, because it doesn't really matter what happens going forward, because what's happened up to this point is damning enough. I don't know if I see a lot of that proactive sort of mentality at Oregon State from the administration there. He cannot be the coach of this team if they're 0-6. You could not bring him home to coach against Wake Forest if they are 0-6. I think that if you get thrashed by Oregon, yes, absolutely. And things don't get better, and it looks like it did against Texas Tech, and the team gives up in the way it did. Absolutely. The problem is if you start getting into trying to think this stuff through, you've got a short week with Houston coming to town on Friday.
Yeah.
So you're going to give the interim now one less day to prepare against a good opponent coming in. Well, that doesn't seem like an ideal time. And so, as I noted in the column, there isn't an ideal time to do this in season. But also, if it it's already screwed, Brandon, because we're having this conversation. So, how much worse could it possibly make it by firing a guy at an imperfect time? I don't. If they're 0-6, I don't think he coaches against Wake Forest. I don't think he gets that far. I think that he is on. I think that we should be on high alert every day, each week at this point. I think it could happen after the Oregon game, depending on exactly how that goes. I think it could happen after the Houston game, depending on how exactly that goes. If they are 0-6 and they lose at App State, I do not think that he is the head coach at Oregon State any longer.
Good stuff, man. No juice to the game this weekend, but it's basically watching a Trent Bray job alert, and what is Oregon going to choose to win that game by is kind of where that game unfortunately sits. As you've noted before in your reporting, probably going to get kicked back into 2027. Dan Lanning talked about it yesterday of wanting that game because of the schedule and being able to stay in state, and it matters to some of the local kids that end up on that team. Final one for you. You got another story up at OregonLive.com. You got the Trent Bray article. You got another one that was posted just a couple hours ago. You want to give readers a heads up of what it is?
Yeah, so people who have been following along might remember that last year we did a series on a guy named Brett Holland, who was a basketball player at Southern Oregon University. He was the oldest player in college basketball at the time, 29 years old. He was the captain there. He had spent 4 years in prison for an assault that was at a college party in Ashland in 2016. He stabbed 2 students during that brawl. He went to prison, and we told the story sort of his journey through that whole situation, through college, returning to play college basketball and achieving his dream. And he's doing something cool, really cool right now, which is that he's on a tour of Oregon prisons and going into different prisons and teaching a class that he developed while he was in prison to give inmates hope, to offer them sort of a glimpse of what redemption can look like, how to reintegrate to society. Second chances, which I recognize is a little bit ironic because I'm sitting here saying Trent Bray does not deserve a second chance. But in life, second chances and the power of getting back out there in the world. And he's also putting on a basketball game in each of these prisons. So Sean Mager, who is a visual journalist for us, did the original story with me. He and I went out to Snake River Correctional Institution in Ontario last week, and we, chronicled this part of Brett's journey. And he's got a foundation called the Side Door Foundation, which is a nonprofit that's devoted to teaching these kinds of themes and spreading the word, about people who have committed crimes, reintegrating to society. And, he's trying to get that off the ground, and he's doing it right now through prisons. A cool little nugget is that he's going to be at OSCI, the Oregon State Correctional Institution, today in Salem, doing this, teaching his class, having the basketball game, which was just a lot of fun to watch. And he's going to have a special guest there today, and that's going to be Wayne Tinkle from Oregon State, who was one of his, real advocates when he was in prison and who really, has stayed in touch with Brett. And Wayne's going to go join him at the prison in Salem today and hang out for the basketball game, which is just a really a cool full circle moment for Brett and for Wayne. So I'm excited to hear more about that today, too.
There we go. Good stuff. Bill Oram, OregonLive.com. If Bray is let go, he will get a second chance. He'll just be a D coordinator somewhere because he is a good defensive mind. Find all his great work, OregonLive.com. Thank you, Bill. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
All right, there we go. Good stuff from Bill Oram.